My name is Savannah Cross, 30 years old. For as long as I can remember, I was the one who quietly kept the family machine running. Not loudly, not heroically, just automatically, like breathing. Whenever my mom came up short on bills, I transferred money without hesitation. When my sister needed tuition help, I covered it, even when she never bothered to thank me. And family trips? I usually paid more than my share because otherwise nothing would actually get booked. I used to think being useful was the same thing as being loved. My mom, Marilyn, had this way of turning need into a moral test. She didn't ask for help. She implied what it said about you if you didn't give it. My sister Talia had the opposite style. She demanded. She laughed. She treated money like it was something that appeared when she wanted it badly enough. And me? I kept saying yes because saying no meant being labeled selfish, difficult, dramatic. The family's favorite insults for the one person who actually held things together. I have a boyfriend, Ethan, and he's the only person who ever said the sentence that scared me because it was true. They don't love you more when you pay. They just get used to it. When the group chat started buzzing about this year's family vacation, 1 week at a resort that costs more than most people's yearly rent, I didn't question it. I just assumed, like always, that I was included. I booked time off work, bought a couple new shirts I didn't need but wanted to feel like I belonged somewhere. I arranged for a friend to feed my dog while I was gone. I even bought travel-size sunscreen, which seems like a small detail, but it's the kind of detail you only buy when you truly believe you're going. The day came, and I showed up with my suitcase. I still remember the weight of it as I walked across the driveway toward the SUV. The sky was bright, the kind of morning that makes everything look cleaner than it is. My mom stood by the trunk with her arms crossed. My sister was already in the passenger seat laughing at something on her phone. No one waved. No one said, "Hey, you made it." But I told myself that was normal too. I popped the trunk and lifted my suitcase, ready to slide it in. That's when my mom stopped me. She didn't hesitate. She looked at me with this cold expression and said, almost like she was reading from a script, "We decided you'd be happier staying home." I froze. Happier at home? I repeated, because sometimes your brain needs to hear the cruelty twice before it believes it. My mom's eyes didn't soften. They didn't flicker with guilt. She just stood there like this was a practical decision she'd made for my benefit. I looked at my sister. Talia smirked, then actually laughed out loud, like this was the punchline to a joke I wasn't in on. She didn't even try to hide it. She leaned back in the seat and said, "You hate long flights anyway." I didn't. I just never got asked. The silence after her laugh was sharp, the kind that slices without sound. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, but I didn't give them what they expected. No arguing, no pleading, no why that they could twist into, "She's always so sensitive." I lowered the suitcase back down, slowly, like I was putting down something fragile. I zipped it tighter, even though it was already closed, because my hands needed something to do. Then I wheeled it back to my car. My mom didn't stop me. My sister was still laughing when I closed my door. I glanced once at the SUV. My mom's face turned away. My sister's phone held up like she was still entertained, and I drove off. On the way home, I expected to feel hurt or angry. Strangely, I didn't. What I felt was clarity, like someone had finally stopped lying to me. I'd been paying for years, literally and emotionally, and now they'd shown me exactly where I stood. They didn't want me there, but they wanted my money. That thought stayed in my head the entire drive, clicking into place like a lock. Ethan was at my apartment when I got back. He'd offered to drive me to the airport that morning because he didn't trust my family to show up on time. When he saw me walking in with my suitcase, his face tightened. "They left without you," he said quietly. I nodded. He didn't ask why. He didn't try to rationalize it. He just took the suitcase from my hand and set it down gently, like it was heavier than it looked. "I'm sorry," he said. I surprised myself by laughing. One short sound, no humor in it. "Don't be. It's clarifying." That night, the proof arrived. My phone buzzed around 9:40 p.m. I glanced at it and saw a payment request in our family group account, $15,600. The note attached read simply, "Your share of the trip." I stared at it for a full minute. My sister had laughed in my face. My mother had told me to stay home like she was doing me a favor, and now they still had the audacity to treat me like their personal ATM. In the past, I probably would have paid it just to avoid conflict, just to keep the peace, just to stop the guilt messages that would come in waves. But this time, something in me snapped. Not into rage, into calm. I pulled up the app, typed in $50, and sent it back with a note. To be continued. Ethan watched me from the couch. $50? He asked. $50, I confirmed. They're going to lose it. I know, I said, and my voice didn't shake. That's the point. Because for once, I wasn't reacting to their drama. I was setting the stage. What they didn't know was that I had been quietly preparing for this moment for a long time. Not with a revenge plan written in bold letters, but with a growing awareness, a file in my head of every time I paid and they disappeared, every time I covered a bill and they called it family, every time they treated my generosity like an expectation instead of a gift. 2 days later, those preparations were going to come to life. Because while they were lounging by the pool at their overpriced resort, the last thing they expected was to see me walk into the lobby. And I wasn't alone. They erased me fast. That's what shocked me the most. Not the exclusion itself, but how smoothly they stepped into a version of the trip where I simply didn't exist. 2 days in, my sister's Instagram was flooded with it. Poolside cocktails, a boomerang of her laughing in the ocean, a photo of my mom in a wide-brimmed hat with a caption about quality family time. Not once did they mention me, not even a vague, wish you were here. It was like I'd been edited out of the family album with one swipe. Ethan sat beside me on my couch while I scrolled, his jaw tight. They're not even trying to pretend, he said. No, I replied. They don't have to. They think I'll still pay. And that was the part that made my hands steady. They weren't afraid of consequences. They'd never had any. Until now. I didn't go to the resort out of desperation. I went because I'd finally realized something. The only reason my mom and sister were so bold was because they believed no one would ever challenge them publicly. They lived in a world where family silence covered everything like a blanket. But I had someone they couldn't manipulate, someone who didn't care about their guilt games. My grandparents. I hadn't called them in months. Not because I didn't love them, but because my mom had made it exhausting. She'd always called them judgmental, said they didn't understand modern life, and she'd trained my sister to only contact them when she needed money. The relationship had been strained for years, not because my grandparents were cruel, but because my mom couldn't stand anyone who held her accountable. When I called my grandfather that first night after the suitcase humiliation, I didn't plan a strategy. I didn't even know what I wanted to say. I just needed someone to hear me and not turn it into a lecture about gratitude. He answered on the second ring. Savvy? His voice was steady, familiar. The kind of steadiness I'd forgotten existed. I told him everything. The driveway, the cold line from my mother, my sister laughing, the payment request, the $50. There was silence on the other end, the kind where you can almost hear someone's jaw clench. Then he said, "We're coming." What? I blinked. My grandmother's voice joined in, firm and quiet. "Pack a bag, sweetheart. We are not letting you be treated like this." I tried to protest. "You don't have to." "Yes, we do," my grandfather cut in. "We should have done it sooner." The next morning, they arrived at my apartment. No drama, just determination. My grandfather wore his old watch, the one he wore to every important meeting. My grandmother had her hair pinned back like she was heading into battle. "We already booked our suite," she said like it was nothing. "We're not freeloading off anyone." Ethan offered to drive us. He didn't ask questions. He just carried bags and opened doors, his protective energy filling the space the way my family never had. By the time we pulled up to the resort, I felt strangely calm. Like I wasn't walking into a confrontation. I was walking into a truth that had been waiting for years to surface. The lobby was marble and citrus, all polished surfaces and expensive cologne, the kind of place designed to make you feel either rich or out of place. I rolled my suitcase across the floor, wheels clicking softly. My grandparents walked beside me like anchors. And then I saw them. My mom and sister stood at the front desk mid-conversation with a clerk about upgrading their suite. My sister was animated, waving a hand like she owned the place. My mom stood stiffly, arms crossed, lips pursed in that familiar "I'm in charge" line. My sister turned first. Her face froze, not confused, shocked, like her brain couldn't process the image of me standing there where she'd erased me. Then my mom turned. The blood drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. And then their eyes dropped to the people standing beside me. My grandfather, upright and sharp-eyed, holding the reservation folder. My grandmother, calm and unmovable, her presence cutting through the lobby like a blade. My mother hadn't spoken to them properly in years. My sister only ever called when she needed money. But here they were, standing with me, not them. The clerk smiled at us. "Checking in?" My grandfather didn't even glance at my mother or sister. He handed over the papers politely. Yes, 2 rooms. The clerk's tone warmed instantly. Welcome back, Mr. and Mrs. Alden. My mom's mouth opened like she wanted to speak, but no words came out. For once, she didn't have a script. My sister recovered first, voice tight and too bright. Wow, this is random. You just showed up? My grandmother looked at her like she was a child reaching for a stove. Not random, she said calmly. Necessary. My sister blinked. What? My grandmother's voice didn't rise, but it carried. If you thought leaving Savannah behind was acceptable, then you need to take a hard look at yourselves. My mom tried to laugh. Mother, it's just a misunderstanding. No, my grandfather said, cutting her off with a single word. It's a pattern. The lobby air shifted. A couple nearby glanced over. My sister's cheeks flushed. The clerk handed us keys. My grandfather took them without acknowledging my mom's existence. We walked toward the elevators, and I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The silence was doing the work for me. That night, my grandparents arranged dinner at one of the resort's restaurants. It wasn't optional. My grandfather didn't ask my mom. He informed her. We sat at a long table under warm lighting, the kind meant to make everything feel celebratory. But the mood was heavy. My mom sat rigid, quiet. My sister stared at her phone but wasn't scrolling. I could tell she was listening. Ethan sat beside me, hand resting lightly on my knee, grounding me. Halfway through the meal, my grandfather set his fork down. The sound was soft, but it stopped the room. He looked directly at my mom. Why? He asked, calm as stone. Did you think it was acceptable to treat Savannah like she didn't belong? My mom's smile flickered. Dad, you're making this dramatic. Answer the question, my grandmother said, her voice gentle but sharp. My mom's eyes darted to me, then to Ethan, then back to my grandparents. She tried the laugh again. She's always so sensitive. We just thought she'd be happier at home. My sister snorted quietly, then stopped when my grandmother turned her gaze. My grandmother began listing examples. Not loud, not emotional, just facts. The bills Savannah paid, the tuition shortfall she covered, the trips she funded, the way you leaned on her every time something went wrong, and the way you gave her back nothing but mockery. My sister shifted in her seat, cheeks red. My mom tried to steer the conversation to the food, the weather, anything. But my grandparents weren't budging. Finally, my grandfather leaned back, folded his hands, and said quietly but firmly, if this is how you treat the one person who supports you most, maybe it's time we reconsider who we support in the future. The words landed heavier than any raised voice ever could. My mom's face went pale. My sister stopped pretending to look at her phone. And for once, neither of them had a comeback. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I just watched my mother realize something she'd never believed possible. That the power she'd used to control me was no longer hers. And in that silence, I understood. This trip wasn't just a vacation anymore. It was a reckoning. The morning after that dinner, the entire resort felt different. It wasn't the place that changed. It was the energy around us. The confidence my mother and sister had arrived with, the kind that comes from years of never being questioned, had cracked overnight. Not shattered, cracked. And cracks have a way of spreading. At breakfast, I watched them from across the dining hall. My sister stabbed at her fruit like it had personally offended her. My mother kept stirring her coffee over and over, even after the sugar had long dissolved. Every so often, their voices rose just enough for me to catch fragments. You humiliated me. You started this. They're taking her side. Me. Not us, not family, me. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table. They're spiraling, he murmured. I know, I said quietly. They've never had to sit with consequences before. My grandparents arrived a few minutes later, unhurried, composed. The moment they sat down, my mother straightened like a child caught misbehaving in class. My sister plastered on a smile so wide it looked painful. The performance began immediately. My sister jumped up to carry towels for my grandparents, as if she'd always been the helpful one. She offered to order drinks, chatted about the weather, laughed too loudly at things that weren't funny. My mother nodded along, complimenting the resort, the food, the service, anything to look agreeable. It would have been impressive if it hadn't been so transparent. My grandparents played along politely, but I caught the small glances they exchanged. The raised eyebrow from my grandmother, the slow shake of my grandfather's head. They weren't fooled. At lunch, my grandfather casually asked my mother when the last time was that she'd called him just to talk. Not to ask for something, not to complain, just to talk. My mother froze. Well, she said too quickly, Life gets busy. Busy enough to avoid your parents for years? My grandmother asked gently. Silence. Then my grandmother turned to my sister. How about you? She asked. When was the last time you called us without needing help? My sister opened her mouth, closed it, then shrugged. I've just had a lot going on. My grandmother nodded slowly. Yes, we noticed. The tension at the table thickened, the air heavy with everything no one wanted to say out loud. Then my grandfather shifted the conversation, straight to the thing my mother and sister cared about most: legacy. He spoke calmly, almost casually, about how money only mattered if it went to someone who respected the people behind it, about how he and my grandmother hadn't worked their whole lives this just to fund entitlement, about how inheritance wasn't a reward, it was a responsibility. My mother's hands trembled slightly around her cup. My sister's smile slipped. You mean, in the future? My mother asked carefully. My grandfather looked at her. I mean now. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. That afternoon, my mother knocked on my hotel room door. She hadn't done that in years. When I opened it, she stood there wringing her hands, eyes darting past me like she expected Ethan to appear and interfere. I let her in anyway. She sat on the edge of the bed and started talking fast, about misunderstandings, about how she felt attacked, about how families sometimes hurt each other without meaning to. Then, smoothly, she slid into familiar territory. We need to stand together, she said. If your grandparents are questioning things, you could help clear this up. You know how things really are. There it was. Not an apology, not accountability. A request. To protect her. To lie? I asked quietly. Her eyes widened. No, to support your mother. I looked at her for a long moment. For the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt tired. I supported you for years, I said. I just won't do it anymore. Her face changed. Not sadness, not guilt. Fear. She stood abruptly. You're making a mistake. Maybe, I said calmly, but it's mine. She left without another word. That evening, I saw my sister pacing the lobby, phone pressed tight to her ear, voice sharp and urgent. I stayed out of sight, but close enough to hear. I need it, she hissed. No, you don't understand. They're giving it to her. Everything. She paused, listening, then snapped. You said it would be fine. You said we'd have backup. Backup. That word lodged itself deep in my chest. Whatever she'd gotten herself into, it was bigger than shopping debt or rent. She wasn't just afraid of losing inheritance. She was counting on it. Dinner that night was supposed to be calm. A private room, soft lighting, wine poured carefully. It lasted 10 minutes. My mother accused my sister of being lazy, of only showing up when she needed money. My sister fired back that my mother had raised her to expect it. Voices rose, plates clinked. Guests nearby shifted uncomfortably. My grandparents said nothing. They watched. Then my sister snapped. I need the money now, she said through clenched teeth. Without it, I'm screwed. The room went dead silent. My mother hissed, Stop talking. Too late. My grandfather set his fork down. That, he said calmly, is exactly why we're making changes. He turned to me. After dinner, he and my grandmother asked to speak with me privately. My mother stood halfway out of her chair. I should come too. No, my grandmother said firmly. My sister didn't even try. Inside their suite, the mood was different. Calm, focused, heavy with truth. They told me they'd been watching for years, how I carried everyone quietly, how I never demanded attention, how I gave without expectation. We hoped they'd grow, my grandmother said softly. They didn't. Then my grandfather said the words that changed everything. They will not inherit anything. Not the money, not the properties, not the keepsakes. Everything would go to me, and not later. Now, a transfer, immediate, substantial. A test, he said, to see how I handled responsibility while they were still here to guide me. I couldn't speak. We don't reward greed, my grandfather said. We reward trust. The next morning, it became public. At breakfast, my grandfather announced that a portion of the estate had already been transferred into my account. 6 figures. My mother went pale. My sister nearly dropped her fork. They tried everything after that. Tears, apologies, promises, sudden affection. My grandparents didn't bend. When the trip ended, the shift was undeniable. My mother and sister left with suitcases full of resentment. I left with clarity. Because for the first time in my life, I understood something with absolute certainty. They never wanted me. They wanted what I provided. And now, thanks to my grandparents, they would never touch it again. When we got home from the resort, the silence was louder than any argument we'd had there. My phone lit up the moment the plane landed. Messages from my mother, from my sister. Missed calls, stacked like evidence. Apologies wrapped in urgency. Invitations to dinner. We should talk. Let's clear the air. Family comes first. I didn't answer a single one. Ethan noticed immediately. You okay? He asked as we rolled our suitcases down the jet bridge. I'm done being chased only when I'm useful, I said. That night, I slept deeper than I had in years. The shift didn't take long to ripple outward. Within a week, word had spread through the family that my grandparents had changed everything. Not rumors. Facts. Money moved. Lawyers involved. No wiggle room. No misunderstandings. And with that came the panic. My sister showed up first. She didn't call. She didn't text. She just appeared outside my apartment one afternoon, pacing near the entrance like she owned the sidewalk. When I came out with Ethan to walk the dog, she froze, eyes locking on me. Can we talk? She asked, voice tight. No, I said calmly and kept walking. She followed. You can't just shut us out, she snapped. This isn't fair. I stopped, turned slowly, looked her dead in the eye. Fair? I asked. You laughed when I was told to stay behind. You booked a luxury vacation on my card and assumed I'd clean up afterward. You didn't think I deserved to be there. Her face twisted. That's not what happened. It is, I said. You just don't like hearing it. She lowered her voice, desperation creeping in. You don't understand what this does to me. I have loans, commitments. I was counting on money that was never yours, I finished. Her eyes flashed. You've always been the favorite. The words stunned me. I was the fallback, I said quietly. There's a difference. She stared at me, searching for guilt, finding none. You're ruining this family, she hissed. No, I replied. I'm stepping out of the role you assigned me. She stormed off, heels clicking like punctuation. My mother waited longer. She tried subtlety first. A handwritten letter. Then a voicemail full of tears. Then silence. Calculated, strategic silence. 2 weeks later, she showed up at my grandparents' house. They told me afterward. She demanded explanations, my grandmother said. Accused us of choosing you over her. And? I asked. And your grandfather told her we didn't choose you, she replied gently. We chose honesty. That was the moment my mother lost her last shield. The next attempt came with teeth. I got a call from an unfamiliar number. A lawyer, polite, professional, careful with his words. He informed me that my mother was concerned about my emotional stability, that she believed I was being manipulated by outside influences, that she feared I was being coerced into financial decisions I didn't fully understand. In other words, she was trying to paint me as unstable. Ethan sat beside me as I put the call on speaker. That's interesting, I said, because all transfers were initiated by my grandparents, witnessed by counsel, and documented. There was a pause. Yes, the lawyer said slowly. We are aware. Then why are you calling? I asked. Another pause. I'll relay your response, he said, and hung up. Ethan exhaled sharply. That was a threat. Yes, I said, a weak one. I wasn't angry. I was alert. I started documenting everything. Dates, messages, calls. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. I'd learned something important watching my grandparents. Power didn't need to be loud. It needed to be prepared. A week later, my sister's world collapsed. I didn't hear it from her. I heard it from an aunt who had always kept her distance. Apparently, my sister had been juggling debts tied to a business venture she never mentioned. High risk, high interest. The kind of thing you only enter when you're certain a safety net exists. The safety net disappeared. Her boyfriend, who'd been counting on that money too, left within days, took his things, cut contact, no dramatic goodbye, just absence. She tried calling me that night. I let it ring. My mother, meanwhile, doubled down. She started telling people I'd changed, that I'd become cold, that Ethan was controlling me, that money had gone to my head. It didn't work. Too many people had seen the pattern. Too many had benefited from my quiet support over the years. And my grandparents, they didn't stay silent. At a family gathering I didn't attend, my grandfather made a simple statement. She's not being punished, he said. She's being respected. That ended most conversations. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. I was at the grocery store when I saw her, my mother, standing near the checkout, staring at me like she'd found a ghost. She walked over slowly. You won, she said, not quietly. This was never a competition, I replied. You took everything, she said, voice shaking. I took nothing, I said. You lost access. Her eyes filled with tears. Real ones, maybe. Or maybe just well-practiced. I raised you, she whispered. And I raised myself, I said gently. She looked like she wanted to scream, or slap me, or collapse. Instead, she turned and walked away. I stood there holding a basket of groceries, heart steady, hands calm. That was the moment I knew it was over. Not because they stopped trying, but because they stopped mattering. That night, Ethan and I sat on the couch, lights low, the city humming outside. "Do you feel bad?" he asked. I thought about it. "I feel lighter," I said, "like I finally stopped carrying something that was never mine." He smiled. "That's growth." "No," I said softly. "That's freedom." The strange thing about freedom is how quiet it sounds at first. No shouting, no slammed doors, no dramatic victory speech, just the absence of weight. In the weeks that followed, my life didn't suddenly become perfect, but it became honest, and that was something I'd never had before. The messages slowed, then stopped. My sister disappeared entirely. My mother's attempts faded into silence once she realized I wouldn't react. Not with anger, not with guilt, not with reassurance. Nothing starves manipulation faster than indifference. My grandparents moved quickly. Lawyers finalized the paperwork, accounts were restructured, responsibilities clearly defined. It wasn't glamorous. It was meticulous. It was respectful. One afternoon, my grandfather sat across from me at his dining table, the same place where I used to help him sort receipts when I was younger. "You understand this isn't just about money," he said. "I know," I replied. "It's about trust," he continued, "and about making sure the cycle stops here." That sentence stayed with me, because that was the truth. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was interruption. A break in a pattern that had quietly chewed through generations. My mother called one last time. Not crying, not yelling. Calm. "I don't recognize you anymore," she said. I took a breath. "That's because you only recognize the version of me that said yes." She was silent for a long moment. "You'll regret this," she said finally. I almost laughed, but I didn't. "I already regretted staying," I replied. That was the end of it. Ethan and I took a short trip a month later. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet place near the coast. No group chats, no expectations, no one counting how much I contributed. One evening, sitting on the sand with the sun bleeding into the horizon, he asked me something simple. "If they apologized tomorrow, really apologized, would you go back?" I thought carefully. "I'd listen," I said, "but I wouldn't return to the same role." He nodded. "That's fair." Back home, I started rebuilding, not just financially, but internally. I said no more often. I rested without explaining myself. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. And something unexpected happened. People treated me differently. Friends leaned in. Conversations deepened. Opportunities opened. Not because I had money or power, but because I was finally present as myself, not as a resource. Months later, I heard through extended family that my sister had moved again, that my mother complained often about being abandoned, that my name still came up in conversations where I wasn't present. But it didn't reach me anymore. I had walls now, healthy ones. The last image I keep from that trip isn't the resort lobby or the dinner table or the shocked looks on their faces. It's something smaller. My grandmother, sitting beside me on a bench overlooking the ocean, her hand resting lightly on mine. "You did well," she said. "Not you were right. Not you won. Just you did well." For someone who'd spent her whole life proving her worth, that was enough. I used to think love meant sacrifice. Now I know better. Love means choice. And this time, I chose myself.